Hello to the third part of chapter 16 of Moby Dick by Herman Melville. And, well, this chapter is titled The Ship, and I'll continue. Like Captain Peleg, Captain Bildad was a well-to-do retired whaleman. But unlike Captain Peleg, who cared not a rush for what are called serious things, and indeed deemed those self-serious things the veriest of all trifles, Captain Bildad had not only been originally educated according to the strictest sect of Nantucket Quakerism, but all his subsequent ocean life, and the sight of many unclad, lovely island creatures round the Horn, all that had not moved this native-born Quaker one single jot, had not so much as altered one angle of his vest. Still, for all this immutableness, there was some lack of common consistency about worthy Captain Bildad. Though refusing from conscientious scruples to bear arms against land invaders, yet himself had illimitably invaded the Atlantic and Pacific. And though a sworn foe to human bloodshed, yet had he in his straight-bodied coat spilled tons upon tons of Leviathan gore. How now, in the contemplative evening of his days, this pious Bildad reconciled these things in the reminiscence I do not know. But it did not seem to concern him much, and very probably he had long since come to the sage and sensible conclusion that a man's religion is one thing, and this practical world quite another. This world pays dividends, raising from a little cabin boy in short clothes of the drabbest drab to the harpooner in a broad shad-bellied waistcoat, from that becoming boat-header, chief mate and captain, and finally ship owner. Bildad, as I hinted before, had concluded his adventurous career by wholly retiring from active life at the goodly age of 60, and dedicating his remaining days to the quiet receiving of his well-earned income. Now, Bildad, I am sorry to say, had the reputation of being an incorrigible old hunks, and in his sea-going days a bitter, hard taskmaster. They told me in Nantucket, though it certainly seems a curious story, that when he sailed the old Categut whaleman, his crew upon arriving home were mostly all carried ashore to the hospital, sore, exhausted, and worn out. For a pious man, especially for a Quaker, he was certainly rather hard-hearted, to say the least. He never used to swear, though, at his men, they said, but somehow he got an inordinate quantity of cruel, unmitigated hard work out of them. When Bildad was a chief mate, to have his drab-colored eye intently looking at you made you feel completely nervous, till you could clutch something, a hammer or a marling spike, and go to work like mad, at something or other, never mind what. Indolence and idleness perished from before him. His own person was the exact embodiment of his utilitarian character. On his long, gaunt body he carried no spare flesh, no superfluous beard, his chin having a soft, economical nap to it, like the worn nap of his broad-brimmed hat. Such, then, was the person that I saw seated on the transom when I followed Captain Peleg down into the cabin. The space between the decks was small, and there, bolt upright, sat old Bildad, who always sat so and never leaned, and this to save his coat trails. His broad brim was placed beside him, his legs were stiffly crossed, His drab vesture was buttoned up to his chin, and spectacles on nose. He seemed absorbed in reading from a ponderous volume. "Bildad!" cried Captain Peleg. "At it again, Bildad, eh? You have been studying those scriptures now for the last 30 years, to my certain knowledge. How far you got, Bildad?" As if long habituated to such profane talk from his old shipmate, Bildad, without noticing his present irreverence, quietly looking up and seeing me, glanced again inquiringly towards Peleg. "He says he's our man, Bildad," said Peleg. "He wants to ship." "Dusty," said Bildad in a hollow tone and turning round to me. "I dust," said I unconsciously. He was so intense a Quaker. "What do you think of him, Bildad?" said Peleg. "He'll do," said Bildad, eyeing me, and then went on spelling away at his book in a mumbling tone quite audible. I thought him the queerest old Quaker I ever saw, especially as Peleg, his friend and old shipmate, seemed such a blusterer. But I said nothing, only looking round me sharply. Peleg now threw open a chest, and drawing forth the ship's articles, placed pen and ink before him and seated himself at a little table. I began to think it was high time to settle with myself at what terms I would be willing to engage for the voyage. I was already aware that in the whaling business they paid no wages, but all hands, including the captain, received certain shares of the profits called lays, and that these lays were proportioned to the degree of importance pertaining to the respective duties of the ship's company. I was also aware that, being a green hand at whaling, my own lay would not be very large, but considering that I was used to the sea, could steer a ship, splice a rope, and all that, I made no doubt that from all I had heard I should be offered at least the 275th lay. That is, the 275th part of the clear net proceeds of the voyage, whatever that might eventually amount to. And though the 275th lay was what they call a rather long lay, yet it was better than nothing, and if we had a lucky voyage, might pretty nearly pay for the clothing I would wear out on it, not to speak of my 3 years' beef and board, for which I would not have to pay 1 stiver. It might be thought that this was a poor way to accumulate for princely fortune, and so it was, a very poor way indeed. But I am one of those that never take on about pricely fortunes, and am quite content if the world is ready to board and lodge me while I am putting up at this grim sign of the thunder cloud. Upon the whole, I thought that the 275th lay would be about the fair thing, but would not have been surprising had I been offered the 200th, considering I was of a broad-shouldered make. But one thing, nevertheless, that made me a little distrustful about receiving a generous share of the profits was this. Ashore, I heard something of both Captain Peleg and his uncountable old crony Bildad. How that they, being the principal proprietors of the Pequod, therefore the other and more inconsiderable and scattered owners, left nearly the whole management of the ship's affairs to these two. And I did not know but what the stingy old Bildad might have a mighty deal to say about shipping hands, especially as I now found him on board the Pequod, quite at home there in the cabin, and reading his Bible as if at his own fireside. Now, while Peleg was vainly trying to mend a pen with his jackknife, old Bildad, to my no small surprise, considered that he was such an interested party in these proceedings. Bildad never heeded us, but went on mumbling to himself out of his book. "Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth—" "Well, Captain Bildad," interrupted Peleg, "what d'ye say? What lay shall we give this young man?" "Thou knowest best," was the sepulchral reply. "The 777th would be too much, would it? Where moth and rust do corrupt, but lay indeed, thought I, and such a lay. The 777th. Well, old Bildad, you are determined that I, for one, shall not lay up many lays here below, where moth and rust do corrupt. It was an exceedingly long lay, that, indeed, and though from the magnitude of the figure it might at first deceive a landsman, yet the slightest consideration will show that though 777 is a pretty large number, yet when you come to make a tenth of it, you will then see, I say, that the 777th part of a farthing is a good deal less than 777 gold doubloons. So I thought at the time. "Why, blast your eyes, Bildad," cried Peleg, "thou dost not want to swindle this young man. He must have more than that." 777th, again said Bildad, without lifting his eyes, and then went on mumbling, "For where your treasure is, where will your heart be also?" "I'm going to put him down for the 300th, said Peleg. "Do you hear that, Bildad? That 300th lay, I say." Bildad laid down his book, and turning solemnly towards him, said, "Captain Peleg, thou hast a generous heart, but thou must consider the duty thou owest to the other owners of the ship, widows and orphans, many of them, and that if we too abundantly reward the labors of this young man, we may be taking the bread from those widows and those orphans. The 777th lay, Captain Peleg." "Oh, Bildad," roared Peleg, starting up and clattering about the cabin, "blast ye, Captain Bildad, if I had followed thy advice in these matters, I would afore now had a conscience to lug about that would be heavy enough to founder the largest ship that ever sailed round Cape Horn." "Captain Peleg," said Bildad steadily, "thy conscience may be drawing 10 inches of water or 10 fathoms, I can't tell, but as thou art still an impenitent man, Captain Peleg, I greatly fear lest thy conscience but a leaky one, and will in the end sink thee foundering down to the fiery pit, Captain Peleg." Fiery pit, ye insult me, man. Must all natural bearing ye insult me. It's an all-fired outrage to tell any human creature that he's bound to hell, flukes and flames. Bildad say that again to me and start my soul bolts, but I'll swallow a live goat with all his hair and horns on. Out of the cabin, you canting, drab-coloured son of a wooden gun, a straight wake with ye." As he thundered on out this, he made a rush at Bildad, but with a marvellous oblique sliding celerity, Bildad for that time eluded him. Alarmed at this terrible outburst between the two principal and responsible owners of the ship, and feeling half a mind to give up all idea of sailing in a vessel so questionably owned and temporarily commanded, I stepped aside from the door to give egress to Bildad, who, I made no doubt, was all eagerness to vanish from before the awakened wrath of Peleg. But to my astonishment he sat down again, and the transom very quietly, and seemed to have not the slightest intention of withdrawing. He seemed quite used to impertinent Peleg and his ways. As for Peleg, after letting off his rage as he had, there seemed no more left in him, and he, too, sat down like a lamb, though he twitched a little as if still nervously agitated. "Hugh," he whistled at last, "the squall's gone off to leeward, I think. Bildad, thou used to be good at sharpening a lance. Mend that pen, will ye? My jackknife here needs the grindstone." "That's he. Thank you, Bildad. Now then, my young man, Ishmael's thy name, didn't you say? Well then, down you go here, Ishmael, for the 300th lay." "Captain Peleg," said I have a friend with me who wants to ship too. Shall I bring him down tomorrow?" "To be sure," said Peleg. "Fetch him along, and we'll look at him." "What lay does he want?" groaned Bildad, glancing up from the book in which he had again been burying himself. "Oh, never thee mind about that, Bildad," said Peleg. Has he ever whaled it any? Turning to me. "Killed more whales than I can count, Captain Peleg." "Well, bring him along then." And after signing the papers off, I went, nothing doubting but that I had done a good morning's work, and that the Pequod was the identical ship that Yojo had provided to carry Queequeg and me round the Cape. So I think that was it for today. Bye-bye till next time.